So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's SecurityBoulevard.com webinar, brought to you by Techstrong and SciCode. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of Techstrong Learning, and we have an exciting presentation for you today. First, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our session or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, the on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude our live session. If you have any questions, we do want you to send those in using the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen. That's also where you're going to find the chat tab, and that's where we want you to engage with one another, engage with us. Let us know your thoughts throughout today's webinar. I will point your attention to the handouts tab, and here's where you can download a copy of today's slides. So feel free to download those at your own leisure. And before we close, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around until the very end. So our topic today is the top 5 reasons why effective SDLC security controls are so difficult. And joining me is Julie Peterson, Senior Product Marketing Manager at SciCode. Julie, thank you so much for being here with me. I'm going to let you take it from here.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about the top 5 reasons why effective SDLC security controls are so difficult, and also how you can make it a bit easier. As Cody said, I am a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at SciCode, and I've been working and writing about tech in various forms for all of my career. I've written about security, open source, big data, AI, ML, and much more. My work has appeared in a number of publications, most notably publications like Forbes, D-Zone, Security Boulevard, Dark Reading. And prior to SciCode, I worked at White Source Software, which is in the security SCA open source space, IBM, and IDC as well. Our agenda today is about, we're going to start with why supply chain attacks are on the rise, and then look at the top 5 reasons SDLC security controls are hard. And then after that, I want to talk about how governance should be the foundation of your SDLC security. And basically that's because having a strong governance foundation improves all of your other security initiatives. So that's our agenda for today. I'm going to jump right on into it. And I'm going to start with software supply chain attacks. We know that they're growing in prevalence. We all see the headlines. We know that they're growing not only in frequency, but also in intensity. And, why start with software supply chain attacks? Well, the truth is that strong, effective governance and SDLC security controls have often been an afterthought for organizations. And this is precisely what attackers are going after. They're going after the soft underbelly of how we build code. It's not being protected, and so it's the easy path for attackers. And this problem is only getting worse. Gartner tells us that by 2025, nearly half of us worldwide will have experienced some form of attack on our software supply chain, which is a 3-fold increase from 2021. So it's a significant problem. The truth is that attackers are shifting their priorities from applications in production that we've done a pretty decent job protecting to software delivery pipelines and developers. So attackers they're just like the rest of us. They're going after the easy, not the hard. And so right now, that's the tools and processes and policies and people that make up the software delivery pipeline. So we know this problem is significant. We know that it's only getting worse. So why are we still finding it so hard to implement effective SDLC security controls? Why is it still so difficult? Well, reason number 1 is that security isn't keeping up with development. If you look here, we have the y-axis is innovation and the x-axis is time. And this chart goes back to about 1998 when open source software was first coined as a term. And it goes on to sort of your virtual machines and your cloud infrastructure. Then we have this kind of interesting gap here, which is around the 2007-2008 time period. And this time period is when DevOps started to rise as a movement. And it brought with it an incredible amount of innovation in the way in which we develop software. So along with that innovation, it brought a lot of new tooling, including CI/CD systems and Git systems. And so it really marked a fundamental change in how we create software. It also, at the same time, as we move on, we're starting to see more things like microservices, containers, and orchestration. So again, we've gone from sort of the old methodology of where we're having release cycles every few months to now where we're releasing bi-weekly, weekly, daily, and sometimes more frequently. So if you look at security tooling at the same time, over the same time frame, you'll notice, first of all, that we start with a gap. So, OWASP was founded about, I think, 21 years ago, just about, and tools like DAST and SAST come on the market. And then there's quite a long period where there's not a lot of innovation going on. And, then about a dozen years ago or so, we have SCA, things like CSPM and CWPP are sort of newer on the market as emerging security technologies. And so we see there's like a lag, so there's like almost a 12-year lag between when cloud infrastructures are being used to when we have a good way to protect them. And then as time goes on, one of the big things that we see here is that the innovation gap between the tooling for development and the tooling for security is just getting bigger and bigger. And so it really clearly shows you that security just isn't keeping up with the way that we are creating software. Reason number two that SDLC security controls are so hard is that security lacks visibility. Quite simply, you can't protect what you can't see. And unfortunately, there's a deficit for what security can see. So, we have all of this new tooling in the SDLC, and a lot of this tooling is assessed, purchased, and implemented by either engineering or by DevOps teams outside the purview of security teams. And by default, these tools aren't configured for security. They're configured for developers trying to get code out the door. And so they're not security friendly. And the conundrum that we have is that security is responsible for securing these tools. And so, how do you secure something that you can't see, that you don't have access to, or that you might not even know exist? It's a significant problem that many organizations are struggling with on a daily basis. Reason number three that SDLC security controls are challenging is that the modern software delivery pipeline has many, many more attack vectors. So this picture here is an image of the Google SOLC framework with a few other attack vectors added in. And if you look at it, we've got a lot of different tools that are tightly integrated. And at any point in the software delivery pipeline, one of those tools could be compromised. Likewise, as code moves from one tool to the next, that tool could be compromised or modified, tampered with on some level. And then if you look at different tools themselves, like you could have in your repos, you could have malicious code committed, or a hard-coded secret, make it past a security check. You could have a bad IAC template, or you could have your code leak. And the big point here is that there are a lot of holes that need to be plugged, and not enough organizations are paying attention to these holes. Whether they don't have visibility or they just don't have the resources, they're not plugging the holes. And with lateral movement, an attacker can get into one system and shift left into your source code, or they can move right into your production environment and really do a lot of damage. What we've been seeing is that these types of attacks, the attackers are in these systems for longer and longer, and they're just doing a lot more damage. Reason number 4 that SDLC security controls are so challenging is that traditional AppSec tools are focusing on security in the pipeline, but not the pipeline itself. So we've got a lot of tools out there that are securing the code, right? So SAST, DAST, and IAST are looking at proprietary code for common security issues and, hoping to scan and prevent the next 0 day from happening. SCA tools are out there and they're looking at your open source code to make sure that you're not releasing a product that has known vulnerabilities in it. Likewise, your apps in production have things like WAF, RASP, CSPM, CWPP, and other programs that are protecting your application and runtime. But there really is a big gap, a big blind spot here on securing the tools, processes, and people that make up your pipeline. So reason number 5 is that DevOps tools are configured for efficiency, not security, right? So we've already talked about a little about how these tools are put in place by either engineering or by DevOps and not by security. And so, that brings a whole host of issues. But then if we just look at these tools themselves, we can see, that the problem is multiplied. So this image here, each column is essentially your pipeline, right? So if we look at the first team, you have your SCM tool, build tools, registry, IAC, and cloud, right? And these tools are all interconnected to make up your pipeline. What we see in most organizations is that different teams have different pipelines. So there's a number of reasons for this, but usually the teams are going out and choosing their own tools. So you might have, a GitHub and a GitLab all in your same organization. So there's more tools that you need to be concerned about. Then when you add in your legacy stack, again, you're adding more complexity. And oh, by the way, mergers and acquisitions also bring with it new tooling and new things to secure. So one of the issues is that efficiency for developers is the priority, not security. A lot of these tools have different policies, and trying to set them is really hard when you have such a diverse ecosystem. And then, when you think about it, some of the policies, branch protection rules and things have to be set repo by repo. And that it's really time consuming and really, really difficult to do. When you think about, maybe you've decided that you're going to solve this problem by standardizing on one set of tooling, that's great. But what happens when you have a merger and acquisition come in with different tooling? Okay, so you say you're going to bring everybody over and, port them to your tooling so they're all on the same stack. And that's a great solution. But unfortunately, it doesn't address the fact that that's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. And so how do you secure those tools? And the reality is that we're going to end up with a wide range of different tools across the ecosystem, and it's really hard and complex to do this when security doesn't own the tools and DevOps isn't necessarily focused on security. So now that I've told you why it's so hard, I want to give a little bit of sort of sunshine and light to the situation, because there are things you can do to make it easier. And we here at SciCode believe that governance should be the foundation of your SDLC security for a number of reasons. First of all, having a strong foundation of governance gives you visibility across these really diverse tooling and ecosystems. And then it allows you to enforce policies consistently across these really diverse and complex ecosystem. And then finally, kind of a happy side effect of having a really solid foundation in governance is that it helps enhance every other security initiative that you are out there dealing with. So visibility is really the price of entry when it comes to governance. You need to be able to see all of your assets across the entire organization as kind of your starting point. We here at Psycode believe that a graph database is the best way to achieve visibility across all of your assets. We have a graph database that we call the knowledge graph. But essentially, what a graph database does is that it integrates with all of your DevOps tools, so your code, tools, build, registry, cloud, and more. And it ingests that data so that and it ingests the data from these tools and then analyzes the metadata and activities that these tools are putting out. So that includes user data, tool configurations and security policies, any kind of events that might be happening, vulnerabilities that are found, and more. And once it ingests and analyzes all of this metadata and activity, it then connects and correlates the data from all of this across all tools and phases of your SDLC. So you have this blanket view into everything that's going on and the relationship to one another. What that allows you to do is it allows you to create a really detailed inventory of your DevOps assets and gives you really just unparalleled visibility. It then takes it one step further. So not only do you know what you have across the board, but you also have a really deep understanding of the activity, roles, teams, and tools throughout your entire pipeline, how they interact with each other, and how one piece might impact another. So we really believe that this should be the foundation of your entire governance program. And it is the foundation of our platform. So once you've achieved visibility, and that's no mean feat, that in itself is quite an accomplishment. But once you've achieved it, you want to start now implementing components of a solid SDLC governance program. And you do that by implementing least privilege policies, authentication, branch protection rules and build rules, secure change management, and more. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but we feel that this is a really good starting point, which will help you along the way. So the first step in a strong governance program is enforcing least privilege policies. Enforcing least privilege is one of the most important policies that you can adopt in that it reduces the risk of all your other security initiatives out there. We all know that developers are over-provisioned. They are given access to any repo that they potentially might someday possibly need access to anytime from now and into the distant future. And that creates risk in itself. Lateral movement, as you said, is really a huge problem. The SDLC has all these tools that are really tightly interconnected. So if you have a developer account that has a lot of access and somebody gets in there, they can do a lot more damage than if you adopt least privilege policies. And adopting least privilege policies is allowing you to enforce the security that where you're really reducing your attack surface, and it forces a malicious actor to actually find the right developer account instead of just any developer account. So again, it's shrinking your attack surface. And then enforcing least privileges, you should also think about separation of duties and roles. It's very, very rare that you would have a developer creating feature code be the same person who's writing your IAC code. That is extremely unusual. It only happens in really, really teeny tiny dev shops. And there's no reason why you should have a developer having access to, IAC repositories or somebody who writes IAC access to the developer repositories. By reducing privilege, you're reducing the amount of access to code that could be leaked or tampered with. And one of the things that we see is pretty typical across a lot of organizations is that least privilege is set on day one, and then it's forgotten about. And there's a number of reasons why that happens. First of all, if you have thousands and thousands of developers and lots of repos, it's just a matter of scale. And it's just a really time-consuming manual process that there's no good way to do it. So imagine if you had a way to automate an audit for excess privilege and how much that could really reduce your overall risk. The second part of a strong governance program is hardening authentication. So we know that developers are the new target, right? We know that their accounts are highly attractive to attackers. You only have to look back at Sawfish in 2020 to know that developer accounts are often the target of phishing attacks. And one of the things that we see is the problem of having developers accidentally save information to their personal repositories. So with the way that GitHub works, GitHub has developers bring their accounts to their organization, and developers often keep their personal accounts set public. And it's really easy to accidentally save code to their personal repository. And that exposes source code, online application login information to online applications and services, and so much more. So by having multi-factor authentication or single sign-on, you can verify that the users are who they say they are. And if your developer accounts are secure, it's a lot harder to infiltrate the SDLC. Again, some of the challenges here with hardening authentication are making sure that they're rolled out uniformly across your entire organization and that you're following best practices. Merger and acquisition activity, again, can be an issue when you're thinking about hardening authentication. So whenever you have new people coming on board, you want to make sure that they are following your best practices and that things like OAuth tokens are set to expire on your schedule. And, you also want to make sure that you're deprovisioning stale accounts. So hardening authentication is really important. In fact, Microsoft did a recent study. They performed a recent survey, and they discovered that by simply having multi-factor authentication in place, they reduced the amount, the likelihood that your account is going to be compromised by 99.1%. which is a huge number. To think about it another way, if you simply have multi-factor authentication turned on, you're going to only be sort of 0.1/10 or 1/10 of 1% likely that your account is going to be compromised. Why? Attackers are just like the rest of us. They're going after the low-hanging fruit, and they're going after the easy, not the hard. So if you have this turned on, they're going to move on to something else. The next thing you want to think about is implementing branch protection rules as part of your governance program. And this includes things like peer review, commit signing, disallowing forced pushes, and unit testing. And while that seems like basic good advice, the problem is that these branch protection rules are usually set by engineering or DevOps and not by security. So security is not maintaining it. And again, visibility here comes in as an issue. So, when it comes to branch protection rules, you need this global view of all the rules, and you need to understand whether they're on or off. Security rules don't generally just change on the fly. So if for some reason they're turned off, that in itself could be a sign that something's amiss. And so security needs to be able to know of this and investigate it. At the same time, they also have to understand whether any commits occurred while these rules were turned off, because they need to investigate whether that is legitimate commit or if it's somebody trying to tamper with your code. So Again, visibility is a problem here with implementing branch protection rules, but also I want to say scale is an issue. Usually there are many rules on each repository, and often they're set repo by repo. And so trying to do this and create a consistent set of rules across the entire pipeline is extremely challenging. Enforcing build rules is, again, it's very similar and has some of the same pitfalls as branch protection rules. The only difference here is that perhaps you're doing slightly different scans for enforcing build rules. So, SAST is one of those things that it generally takes a long time to do a scan, and so you might not be doing it on every pull request. Maybe you're doing it just before the build. But the idea here is that you want to make sure that the rules are being followed consistently and that every scan in place is being performed. That if you have multiple tools or multiple instances of the same tools, that they're happening consistently across the board. And again, the scale of this problem when you have so many tools is that managing them is extremely complex and difficult. The idea behind enforcing build rules is that you want to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. And then finally, once you have achieved security nirvana and all of your security controls are in place, you want to make sure that they're not changing. Security rules are only changed rarely, and they're done in a very sort of intentional, thoughtful, and sanctioned ways. So if a tool is changing on its own or outside of security's visibility, security really needs to know about it. It could be a signal that there's some suspicious activity going on. So you need a way to continuously monitor all of your security controls. And then should something happen, you need a way to be automatically alerted, whether it's through Slack or some kind of alerting platform like ServiceNow or PagerDuty. You need a way to identify that suspicious activity immediately and take action so that you can determine whether there's something going on. So those are some of the basics of what we think should be part of your governance program. And, it may sound like common sense, but the truth of the matter is that we're still not doing the basics all that well. Definitely we need a way to automate and make this task a lot easier. But once you've done that, the benefits are astronomical in that having a really strong governance program makes all of your other security initiatives better. And we're going to talk about a couple of security initiatives that you might have on the board, and you can see how governance can help improve them. So the first thing I want to talk about is code leakage, right? So code leakage happens in a number of different ways. You might have a developer accidentally save a bunch of code to their personal account, which happens a lot more than we'd like to admit. You might have an external actor intentionally exposing your code. How can governance help? Well, first of all, least privilege policies can limit the access to code. So I'm going to give you Nissan as an example. Nissan had a pretty big breach where their Bitbucket server had its default password credentials in it, and a bunch of source code was leaked, including mobile apps, I think dealer portal, vehicle logistics, marketing, customer retention data, and I think there was even some sort of product roadmap stuff on there, which, if they had least privilege policies in place, perhaps you wouldn't have had so much code leaked, right? So clearly an account was compromised, and it just, the repercussions were devastating. Security controls in place decrease the likelihood of a code leak, and then detecting anomalous or suspicious activity. Again, the sooner you can find it, and if you're scanning for it constantly, you'll find it pretty quickly. It will decrease the likelihood that a bad actor is able to, get in your code and leak it. And as we all know, our code is our lifeblood. It is who we are, and the last thing you want is it to be out there exposed online. So governance can also help you with code tampering. If there's anything that SolarWinds has taught us, is that you can't always assume that just because a certificate is signed and valid that you can trust the signing of that. You need to actually combine that signing along with metadata and insights from across all stages of your SDLC so that you can verify that those files are actually what they say that they're supposed to be. If you have a least privilege policy, you can also confirm that the person who is committing code has the right access. They actually have access to commit to the repo. If there is somebody committing code to a repo that they're not supposed to have access to, that is a sure red flag that there is something going on. Likewise, if you have authentication hardened, you can verify that users are who they claim to be, right? How do we know that they are who they are? It's because we've authenticated, we've hardened our authentication. And then finally, or next rather, build branch protection rules and build rules. Make sure that we're not accidentally, inadvertently committing errors into our code, right? So we're doing things like peer review or scanning for hard-coded secrets to make sure that we're not accidentally introducing mistakes into our code itself. And then finally, security control monitoring helps us understand the whole ecosystem and whether any unsanctioned changes are happening in your environment that might indicate that your code is indeed being tampered with. So security and governance also helps you with hard-coded secrets, right? So hardening authentication makes your accounts harder to compromise, and then it reduces the risk that an outsider can see your secrets and use them to, detrimental effect. Least privilege policies reduces access to code that might contain hard-coded secrets, right? So, when we hard-code secrets, not a secure development strategy, but we hard-code them assuming that the people who are seeing them are trusted. So what happens if you have either an account that's been compromised or a malicious insider? A least privilege policy limits the amount of code that can be accessed and limits the possibility that more hard secrets are going to be exposed. And then things like branch protection rules, specifically here peer reviews, help prevent hard-coded secrets from just entering the code base in the first place by finding them before they become a liability. And then finally, IAC security can be helped by a strong governance program. Hardening authentication reduces the risk that a compromised insider is accessing your IAC templates. And things like separation of duties and least privilege policies reduces IAC access to only those people who actively work on it and who need it. So again, it's all about shrinking your attack surface. So we here at SciCode provide a complete software supply chain security solution, and we give you complete visibility, security and governance, and integrity across your entire SDLC. And our platform addresses a number of use cases, some of that which we've talked about today. Those use cases include source control and CI/CD security, code tampering prevention, hard-coded secrets detection, code leakage, infrastructure as code and cloud security, software composition analysis, and security and compliance assurance. And we provide you with a platform that protects your entire SDLC. So at this point, I've reached the end of my formal presentation, and I would love to open it up for any questions if we have them.
So Julie, we have received a couple questions, and we're just going to take them from the top. So first question reads, We use GitLab. Can't we just do all this with their advanced security features?
Well, you can for, for GitLab itself. But I think we've talked enough that there are a lot of other tools out there that you wouldn't be able to protect with their advanced security features, right? So, what if you have Bitbucket as your server or, GitHub? So again, that's only security in one tool, and we're talking about protecting the entire pipeline. The other issue here is that a lot of the policies are set repo by repo, and great if you can set those policies in place, but you really need, with the scale of things, you really need a way to automate that that capability so that you can set policies once and continuously automate them. So I think in that way, the Psycode, gives you this ability, or you have this ability to kind of do things on a macro level and looking at the whole ecosystem and not just one tool. Securing one tool is great. I'm not going to say it's not, but what about every other tool out there?
Thank you so much. Our next question reads, what's the biggest mistake companies make when it comes to governance, and is there something that is often overlooked?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, a lot of what we've talked about, it's about auditing the basics, right? The basics are still a problem, and we need to audit them. So we have to assume that something that was once secure is not going to stay secure. We're not going to maintain that security unless we're constantly monitoring and auditing those. So, adding an excess privilege audit adds a ton of extra security. Is that something that you're doing on a regular basis, right? Requirements for developers change. How often are you looking at it? Just because you set it on day one doesn't mean that it's still accurate on day 1000. So if you're constantly locking down your user accounts, you're going to reduce your risk across the board, whether that's from, say, a rogue insider or a compromised insider. Just really focusing on those basics continuously. It's not a one and done. You have to be keeping up with it. And a lot of organizations just aren't, because it's hard. It's hard, it's time consuming, it's manual. I feel like I've said that a couple of times, but it's the truth. So really, I think the biggest mistakes companies do is think that they've said it once and that they're good to go, that you really need to, just keep up on it. And, that lack of consistency is an issue as well. So I think that's what I would say is the biggest mistake, is just kind of forgetting the basics.
So GitHub has announced that it will require multi-factor authentication within the next year. Won't that solve the authentication problem?
For GitHub, yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction. It's definitely going to help. But the problem is that's just not the only place. GitHub can't confirm that users are who they say they are once you're outside that system. So I think that speaks to really thinking holistically about the whole ecosystem as an issue, as something that needs to be protected and secured. It's not just one tool. Remember, these tools are really interconnected. You could get in, further down the pipeline and work your way back into a source control system that way. And, nobody wants to be the next headline. Nobody wants to be the next SolarWinds. So I think, we need to start thinking about this as a bigger picture problem. It's not just one tool. It's all of our tools and how interconnected they are.
So throughout today's webinar, you mentioned the top 5 reasons SDLC governance is hard, but are there more reasons, like 6 and 7?
I think one of the things, that's a great question too. me think about it for a minute. I think one of the things, I feel like I've kind of mentioned it a number of times, but I don't know if I've explicitly said it, but it's about the scale of the problem. So, we're not talking about a dozen developers with a couple of repos. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of developers. We're talking about, in excess of, hundreds of thousands of repos. We have one customer who has more than 500,000 repos. And so scale is like, it's huge, right? And we're not even just, talking about it's just not the tools alone, but it's, how many people are using those tools, how many policies do you have in place, how many repositories do you need to lock down, how many, different branch protection rules do you have to put in place. So again, the scale is a problem. If we could easily solve it, we wouldn't be struggling with the basics. And so I think that's probably number 6. I think, number 7 would be something along like the tooling, right? There aren't enough tools that are addressing this problem, which is why this problem is so big. And so you really start to, look at the scale and understand that you need, more automated tools to perform all of this governance and to protect your entire SDLC.
Well, thank you so much, Julie. At this point in time, it looks like we have run through all of our questions. So I'll take this opportunity to remind our audience, go ahead and send in any questions that you might have. This session is being recorded, so if you missed any of our discussion or you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend, you should be receiving an email shortly after we conclude with a link to access the on-demand recording. You can also revisit this webinar by checking out the Security Boulevard website at securityboulevard.com/webinars, and be sure to look in the on-demand section. And while we wait for a couple more questions, I'll go ahead and give away those 4 Amazon gift cards I mentioned at the top of the hour. So our first winner is Rainier V. Our second winner is Juan Esteban L. Our third winner is Cindy L. And our fourth and final winner is Reza A. So to the 4 of you, congratulations. Please keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. But if you don't happen to see an email, please check your spam folder. So Julie, I'm not seeing any more questions. So is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with before we close?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for their time. I appreciate being able to talk about, a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And thank you for attending.
Great. And Julie, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate having you on and you sharing your expertise with us. I'd like to thank SciCode for sponsoring today's webinar. And I would also like to thank all of you, our audience. We really appreciate you spending your time with us today. We ask for one extra moment for you to fill out a brief post-webinar survey that should pop up on your screen here in just a moment. But otherwise, we do hope to see you at an upcoming Techstrong Learning webinar or workshop. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And Julie, thank you once again.
Thanks.